Well, I'm sure our original benefactor would love to have seen those pictures of the motor car. Coming on to our third speaker in this session, Robert Allen is going to speak on turning data into information, maximizing the potential of digital data technology. And he is very kindly sponsored by the NFU Mutual Charitable Trust Award. Robert.
Your Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, I started my Nuffield Scholar as a data analyst working for a company that supplies environmental land and property data, which is where the data interest came in, and halfway through I became the technical director of Greenvale AP, who are the providers of fresh packing potatoes in the UK. So starting with who I visited and what my project was centred on, I was interested in looking at the supposed revolution that big data and data technologies was going to provide to agriculture. There's an awful lot of hype and an awful lot of investment money has gone into data technologies in the last 5-6 years, which seemed to be slightly at odds with some of the experience I was having at farms, where use of data was not as good as it could be. So who did I need to visit? I thought I'd better go and visit some clever people who understand data, some guys who are writing the technology, and also some of the growers who are actually trying to implement it on farm. I travelled extensively in North America. There's actually a lot of good work being done in the UK, Australia, and I also did a trip to Russia. If you're going to visit data technologies, you end up looking at a lot of very anonymous office blocks, where all the people are writing the code, but I was fortunate enough to spend quite a lot of time in fields actually looking at what people were doing on the ground. I assumed that my project was actually going to be looking at the technology itself, but it soon became apparent that actually the behaviours and the processes by which businesses use data is actually much more important. And this table is a very good summary of the difference between businesses that are undisciplined in how they use data through to companies which are have a very governed approach to using data. And sadly to say, the majority of farming businesses I visited would be classified as undisciplined or reactive. Red arrows are things that I commonly saw on virtually all visits. There were one or two that were getting up towards the top end, and so the focus of my project turned more to the behaviour rather than the technology. And what is business behaviour with data? It's a data strategy, and the best definition I came across was that it's people, process, technology, in that order. We tend to focus on the technology and ignore the other two, but a good strategy starts with the people and works upwards. There's a big issue and a big assumption in quite a few people that one of the biggest stumbling blocks is we just need to get rid of what we can call the digital immigrants, i.e. people my age and up who metaphorically immigrated into the digital era, and the digital natives will take over and everything will be fine. That's a complete fallacy, because digital skills is not data skills. The fact that you can use a piece of digital technology doesn't mean you understand why you're doing it. And data vision doesn't mean you have to know how to do the actual technical data processing. And there's far more data vision and domain expertise in the immigrants than the natives. And we waste that at our peril. And the key challenge is how do we merge the two? Within an individual business, who are your data champions? Who are the people who shout from the rooftop that it matters how we collect the data? Not one company I visited had a disciplinary procedure for treating business data badly. You know, you can go and crash a truck and you get disciplined, but your asset of data, no disciplinary process at all, which I find extraordinary. Another fantastic office block, but Black Gold Farms, based in North Dakota, are a family-owned farming business. They grow potatoes across 9 states in the US, and when I visited them last July, they had started a complete review process from top to bottom of where every piece of data across their business was collected, whether it was collected effectively, and who had responsibility for it. And therefore, which skills do they need, either externally or internally, to manage that process. So the process, this is the architecture of how you capture data across your business. And the biggest single issue is understanding your scope of what you want to do. I had virtually every meeting I had with the grower, at some point they said, we've got this software and it doesn't work. When you unpicked it, it didn't work because they wanted it to do things it was never designed to do. So understanding your scope is critical to understanding what data technology you need. And in potatoes, where I work, measuring ground cover through the season is a key variable. And every one of those technologies, from eyeballing the crop through to measuring it with the satellite, is in use. They're all perfectly valid, but if you're looking at one crop and you want to tell your mate, did it grow from last week, eyeballing it's fine, but if you're trying to manage a portfolio of 100 crops and more across Minnesota and North Dakota and understand how the relative crops are performing, eyeballing won't work. You need some other technology. And so therefore the scope is critical. That is the control room. It's manned 24 hours a day for Black Earth Farms in Russia. Black Earth Farms, it manages a land bank of 300,000 hectares, about 500 kilometres south of Moscow. It was pretty much a failing business in 2010 when a UK-led senior management was sort of parachuted in to look after it. And why I wanted to go and visit them and why I was really impressed by them is in 2010 they had a blank sheet of paper. They could have done anything. But they really, really defined what their business requirements are and then procured the technology to meet that requirement. And as a measure of progress, 2014 was as hot and dry as 2010 when Russia was banning wheat exports because the harvest had failed. Last year, their crops were at or above budget. So the management, the agronomy have been completely transformed. The other bit about process that is not very well done is probably the three words that Ronald Reagan said with the most sense: trust by verify. He was talking about his relationship with Gorbachev, but Dan Freeberg published this the week after I went to visit him. He was a fascinating guy. But verification of data is absolutely critical because we might pay a lot of money to create data or get somebody else to give us data, but that's no guarantee that it's actually describing what you want. So the quality control and quality assurance of your data is really important, and there's very few growers who do it well. They just collect data and then go, it doesn't mean what we said it means, and they just move on. So preventing the data problems that you can have by verification is critical. Finally, we get to the technology. That's just some of the companies that I connected with during my travels, and the key point here is that they are all mass market off-the-shelf products. So a lot of farmers say we just want a single solution. It won't exist and it never will exist. If I asked all of you to write down your requirements of what you wanted in your business, there would be huge commonality, but there would be fluffiness around the edges where you all had slightly different requirements. So you're not going to find a single solution. That's why your scope is so important. And it is a toolbox. But what you decide to put in your toolbox is governed by what you're doing as a business, not the other way around, which is how a lot of people are thinking at the moment. They just want an answer. Well, it's not going to happen. Just finish off by talking about ownership. I mean, everybody I spoke to said, oh, who owns the data? It's sort of the most vocal part of the data debate at the moment. And I think there's two critical things where debate needs to change. The term data is a generic term. It can refer to raw data, which is data that's just created in its raw format off a tractor or whatever. There's derived data, which is where you take raw data, merge it with some intelligence, and create a follow-on data set. Aggregated data, you're bringing lots of data sets together. And metadata which is descriptive data that describes raw data or derived data. Okay? The issue is, legally, they are all very different. So when you're talking about who owns or where does the data go or who owns it, what are you talking about? Because for a lot of people, those things are very different. The other issue is that we confuse ownership with control of access. It is perfectly legitimate for me as an ag data service provider to create a contract that says, you own it as the customer, but I have permanent access to it. And in some cases, that's perfectly valid and actually is beneficial to both parties. So when you're talking about access, ownership and access are two different things. And I think what I would say is that, well, the American Farm Bureau Federation, an interesting case study, because when I started my study, they said, farmers own all the data, there is no debate. And that's the most vocal agricultural stance at the moment, but it's by no means universal. And actually, they then did a very significant review process and project during my study, and they've ended up at the point where they're saying, actually, farmers owning everything isn't sustainable or it can't be implemented. And actually, what they're asking for is transparency, so that whichever contract you sign up to with an ag data service provider, you know what you signed up for. So if somebody wants to reuse, resell your data, that's perfectly legitimate as long as you know. So, it's a much more complicated piece than it was 12 months ago. And I'd just like to finish up by saying I do feel deeply privileged to have been able to have this study opportunity, both my sponsors and the Nuffield Farming Trust, and thank you very much for listening.